Excuse me. Looking for my father. Heard he was around here. He got a name, kid? Yeah. Oko. Hey, we do not say his name. Look, can you just tell me something about him? We don't talk about Oko, no, no, no. We don't talk about Oko. What? Howdy Magic partners, let's talk about some of the Thunder Junction cards that I think we'll see play in the 60 card formats. Or that was the plan at least. Howdy Magic partners, I'm Future Insignios. This rodeo clown over here couldn't get the video done in time, so instead of scrapping all the footage and research, I've decided to just finish the video and then I'm gonna pop in from time to time and tell you how right or wrong I was. This will also give me one last chance to talk about the Modern Horizons 2 format before it becomes the Modern Horizons 3 format, or maybe the Modern Horizons 2.5 format. I'm not really clear on the power level of this set. It's gonna come out in a few hours as of the time of recording. But that's all in the future. Right now we're talking about the past. Now, first order of business, I'm not doing that the entire time. I'll keep the hat on though. Let's talk about those 60 card formats for a little bit and see how they're doing before the set comes out. In terms of Pauper, I didn't really see much change after MKM, aside from cards like Novice Inspector or Demand Answers, I believe? Yeah, Demand Answers. Those cards were pretty good, but overall, nothing really changed in Pauper. And in terms of Standard, I never really know what's going on in Standard. I just kind of play what I like. It's a bit of the Wild West, honestly.
Then I guess it's my job to talk about Standard. In terms of aggro decks, we have Red Deck Winds, Boros Convoke, and Bont Toxic. But aside from that, the vast majority of the metagame has been nothing but control and mid-range for as long as I can remember. The Phyrexians may be gone from the story, but they're certainly not gone from Standard. The Traxa, Shieldred, I'm sick of control. You know what they should bring back to Standard? Dredge.
But Pioneer is one that's near and dear to my heart. Arclight Phoenix is really good in Pioneer right now. We barely even got anything from MKM, and it's just crushing. I'm a little concerned that it might be hit by some sort of ban. Personally, I feel like they could hit Treasure Cruise and we'd still be perfectly fine with Dig Through Time. It is an objectively worse card for the strategy that Arclight Phoenix is trying to go for, but it's enough of a downgrade to where the deck would still be competitive, but not overly dominant. But it's not like it's the best in the format right now. That honor goes to Rakdos Vampires with their turn 3 Blood Artist's big son, whose name I forgot. Man, yeah, that's embarrassing. Amalia combo is still going strong despite the fact that it can cause draws, but that's a little bit rare. All things considered, it's one thing that they can do, but not necessarily that they always do. Decks like Mono Black Discard, Hidden Strings, Niv to Light, Azorius Spirits, and Azorius Control have been on the rise, as well as Izzet and Soul decks. I did not expect this archetype to come back so strong. But we still have our traditional aggro decks like Boros Aggro and Boros Convoke, and honestly, Pioneer feels healthy, but there is an underlying asterisk to that, mostly because of Phoenix and Vampires. Now, what do I say about Modern? Well, let's start off with the fact that Fury was banned, which led to the rise of Rhinos and Living End, which in turn led to the ban of Violent Outburst. So now both Rhinos and especially Living End have fallen off. And now the top decks are Domain, Gargoyle's Vengeance, Yawgmoth, and Tron, with a little bit of Titan, Murktide, and Rakdos Scam. When it comes to Living End and other Cascade Suspend spell decks, they kind of did need the Violent Outburst instant speed part, so that way they could respond to Graveyard Hate or any other kind of thing that's on the battlefield. And a friend of mine who still plays Living End to this day, and has for a long time, has been using Press the Enemy to get out the Living End at instant speed, which is honestly a really smart idea. It is both interaction and a way to get off your combo. But when it comes to the Crashing Footfalls decks, you're just a bunch of babies if you're not going to play it now that Violent Outburst is gone. Like, seriously, it's still turn 3, 2 4/4s. And you've also been running the Leyline and Scion combo. Like, there's no reason. Like, the deck is perfectly fine. Like, oh, boo-hoo, you don't have the instant speed part now. Like, seriously, the deck is perfectly fine. So Domain has been pretty powerful because it can have the turn 1 leyline binding, which is surprisingly useful most of the time, and the turn 2 Sign of Draco. You don't even need the leyline to get that out on turn 2. And due to the surge in Domain decks, Pick Your Poison is practically in every single deck. Hell, I splash Pick Your Poisons in my Murktide deck. And just like I predicted, the Surveil lands are everywhere. Ah, you love to see it. Now with that out of the way, let's get into those Thunder Junction cards. Final Showdown is an instant speed board wipe and or give your target creature indestructible and or all creatures lose all abilities until end of turn. All creatures lose all abilities until end of turn is only going to affect all the creatures that are currently on the battlefield. So you can't cast it in response to a Walking Ballista in Modern or Spark Double in Pioneer, but you can cast it once the Amalia combo starts to go off, assuming you're not just going to wipe the board. I foresee this card seeing heavy play in control decks going forward, because it's just instant speed board wipe. Howdy, it's me again. I found a few Pioneer decks that ran Final Showdown, but they didn't do all that well, and then the decks dried up after that. Even if it is at instant speed, an uncounterable board wipe is still better.
Chateau has a very powerful effect, but I can't really think of many existing decks that could break it, which means this could lead to a brand new archetype. Definitely something with Driftveil or Grieve, maybe even Dredge. You never know.
Yeah, Satoru is in Humans and Reanimation, that's great and all, but how in tarnation did we get the Dredge part right? Like, that was an ad-libbed joke. Technically, this deck is mislabeled, it's actually Crabvine, but, you know, still, Giza the Hellraiser, right? Not as good as Shieldred, but it's certainly going to be a decent replacement once Shieldred rotates out. Specifically, I'm going to say this card's going to see most of its play in Pioneer, the mono black discard decks, as well as Dimir Control as kind of like their top ender, as a one of, maybe a two of. Shieldred is still better, but this card's nothing to slouch at. Like, seriously, each time you commit a crime, you get 2 zombies? Sure, they come in tapped, but it's each time you commit a crime. Thoughtseize, counter spells, like, Field of Ruin. They're all crimes. After getting dumpstered by this card at the pre-release, I've come to despise Giza, and was pretty glad that I'd probably never see her outside of Standard. So I found a few modern Yawgmoth decks that run her because Yawgmoth targets, which creates 2 zombies, which Yawgi can then use to continue their thing, but only once per turn. And I found a few new versions of the Rock that's focused on committing acts of questionable legality, and I'm using that phrase because the actual bird sets off alarms at YouTube. This is Markov's at Karlov Manor all over again.
Giralf is basically a blue monastery mentor, so anything that works with them will work with here, including mentor themselves. And considering what's in Standard, you can make a version of this deck in all 3 formats.
Say its full name.
Oh, I didn't realize you wanted this video to get suppressed. Giralf
No,
the
just kidding,
Flesh
you don't have to!
Disappointingly,
I've only found a few decks built around Giralf. He's been added to the sideboards of modern Breach decks, which is better than most Mythics, but I still believe in a mentor Giralf deck. Kinda like this one. Wait, nope, that is vintage. Mom, can we have Snapcaster Mage in Pioneer? No, we have Snapcaster Mage at home. But no, in all seriousness, like, just give us Snapcaster Mage in Pioneer. But outside that, these cards in particular, they're fine. Archmage's Newt feels more like a commander card because you got a crew 3, saddle, it's crew. You got a crew 3 and then hit it, but you also don't have to if you want to get the thing off. But it can't be useful for counterspells and neither the Lockpicker. So, you know, it's Lockpicker will never see play, but surprisingly, the Newt has found itself in a legacy deck. This Esper control deck is centered around getting tempted by the ring, and then being able to get in with your Newt for damage to cast your spells with flashback. But a card that is an upgrade is the Slick Shot Show-Off. Flying, haste, plot for 1 in a red, and +2/+0 whenever you cast a non-creature spell. So essentially on turn 2, you can plot this, then on turn 3, play it, then play 3 non-creature spells like Opt or Consider or Sleight of Hand and just ram them in the face for a lot of damage. Or you just play it on turn 2. It really depends on the kind of deck you're up against, and the fact that it can do both is just really good. Thank goodness it's a 1/2 and doesn't gain any toughness, because that means it's not going to be overly broken, because, you know, most removal will be able to get rid of it. Modern Prowess hasn't really seen much high-level play for a good long while, but this might be able to bring it back. But certainly Pioneer Prowess is going to make great use of this card, and Standard Prowess goes without saying. Slick Shot Show-Off sees play in every Prowess deck in every format. What else can I say? But if only the new Jace were as easy to place. Like, it's not a bad card, it's just that You know, when evaluating a Planeswalker, you want to look at its utility first because the vast majority of Planeswalkers that see play have really good utility. Outside of its only cast on turn 4, doesn't actually do much in terms of utility. It just draw, discard, and you get to plot something. It doesn't affect the board in any way. But because it's a 2-drop on turn 4, that means you have mana open to hold up for a counterspell, or lightning bolt, or whatever Pioneer uses. I don't know, is a charm. Outside of a Leyline of Anticipation deck, Jace isn't really gonna see play much of anywhere. Although I guess you could use it to get out Tybalt, Cosmic Imposter, but Release to the Wind already does that. I tried Jace in a few brews, but he underperformed in all of them except for Tybalt decks, which is pretty much the consensus across Pioneer, Modern, and even Legacy.
Honest Redstein feels like a decent include for modern Yawgmoth decks, but no more than a one of, if any, honestly. The deck already runs Court of Calling to tutor it, and it's already chock full of so many toolbox creatures that you kind of don't have the space.
Redstein is actually popping up in Yawgmoth decks. He's even seeing standard play in the 4-color Legend deck. It ain't easy, but it's honest work. Harvester of Misery is going to be a good card for modern living end decks. But as a 2 of in the sideboard, because you got to be safe, because it affects all creatures when it enters, and if you have 2 of them come in, that means your other creatures get -4/-4. Which will destroy your Sphinxes, and among other things. It won't destroy your Ents, but it's... I could not find a single modern deck, let alone living end deck, that runs Harvester. But I did find a few Legacy Reanimation decks that play them as one-ofs to take care of all the small fry.
Requisition Raid is a great sideboard card that can hit 2 targets if necessary, as well as pump your entire board. I'd be very surprised if this didn't see play.
Yeah, of course Requisition Raid sees play, look at it. Now, Take for a Ride is nothing really special. We've seen this kind of effect countless times before. It's just active treason, but with an additional effect. But whenever you commit a crime, you can play it as though it had flash. I want to remind you that anything that targets an opponent or their stuff is a crime. So, like Unlicensed Hearse targeting something in the graveyard is a crime. That is 0 mana on turn 3, which allows you to do this. But it will be slept on because it doesn't do all that much in the grand scheme of things. Somehow, Take for a Ride was played in a Pioneer sideboard. Sure, it didn't get first place, but who cares? Free Strider Commando. Now, sure, you might think, why is this here? Well, it's a 3-mana 3/3 with some decent abilities and plot. Well, I'd like to point out that it gets the +1/+1 counters if it was cast for no mana, or if it wasn't cast at all. But I'd like to remind you that this card is a common, as well as these, maybe for Pauper, but also these are legal and standard, just for some food for thought. Yeah, no decks. Speaking of Pauper, Phantom Interference, I like it. I'm going to try it in my Pauper Dimir Control deck, and I'll let you know how that goes. Phantom Interference hasn't really taken off in Pauper, but I've been getting pretty good use out of it in my Dimir Control deck. Aside from that, some Pioneer Spirits decks play it.
Whose idea was it to make Reckless Lackey a common? Seriously, haste, first strike, 1/2 that can be sacrificed without needing to be tapped? Of course it's going to see play in Pauper.
Yeah, these cards are great. Deep Muck Desperado is certainly a card. I did not expect to hammer it in this set. I don't think it's good enough for any real mill deck. Maybe something like a Historic or Timeless Mill. But speaking of those, Surgical Extraction and Archive Trap are now going to be legal on Arena. I don't know if they're in Historic, but they're certainly going to be in Timeless, which means Timeless Mill. Sure, we only have access to the one crab, but we do have the Cancrix from the original Modern Horizons. So you could do like some sort of snow mill, snill, as it would be. Timeless Mill is actually a thing. Sure, no one plays the Cancrix or the Desperado, but I'm counting that as a win, as an actual mill player.
Simulacrum Synthesizer will see play in Affinity. What, did you want me to say more? It's gonna be good in Affinity, just look at the card. Ugh, fine, I'll explain. Affinity has a bunch of 7-drops that cost less because of your artifacts. There, I explained it.
Yeah, Synth is in Affinity, alright. This deck hasn't rocketed up the leaderboard quite yet, but I feel like that's gonna change pretty soon. Vigilance, Trample, Haste, 1 and an X, Hydra. When it dies, you get tapped treasure tokens equal to its power. This card is great, and honestly, I could easily see this seeing play had Shivan Devastator not already come and gone. I figured Shivan Devastator would have been really good, but it just never made the cut. To be fair, Vigilance Trample Haste is a little bit better than Flying Haste, but not by much. And the fact that you get the treasures afterwards is pretty cool. I could see this as a top ender in some green Stompy decks or even Mono Green Devotion and Pioneer, but I don't think they really need it, that's the thing. Some devotion decks use it as a win condition, but more importantly, it led to me finding out about the Soul Flare archetype in Pioneer, a deck that gives the Commander Precon staple Zoltapa a new lease on life. The Hydra is either a piping hot bowl of keyword soup, or a way to actually cast Zoltapa. It's pretty impressive. I like this deck, I might actually build it.
KARAOKE allows you to play Mono Black Storm, so long as you have the life to pay for all the spells, something that Shieldred the Apocalypse can provide. I'd love to see this in sort of 8-rack style deck in Pioneer, but we only have Shrieking of Fiction as of right now. Maybe Waste Not, but that's just a pipe dream.
You know, I figured the part about Waste Not was just wishful thinking, but apparently the deck is good against the most popular deck in the format, Arclight Phoenix. You know you've made it when a deck's sole purpose is to take you out. Tiny Bones the Pickpocket reminds me a lot of Ragavan. It has a keyword that gives it some sort of evasion, and you get to steal something from your opponent. While it's not as good as Ragavan, it's definitely good enough to be seen play, maybe even alongside it in Modern, but probably not, but at the very least in Mono Black discard decks. I'd play this. I've found over 80 standard decks running Tiny Bones, and at most 5 non-standard decks. Black Ragavan, this is not. So why is he nearly $30?
Snores. That's it though. In effect, it's either Bob that attacks or reverse Bob that needs to be crewed before attack. I just think it's a goofy card, and I'd be surprised if it actually saw play.
Caustic Bronco was added to the script as a joke because it's funny to say Snorse, but it does see play for 2 reasons. Rakdos decks can easily saddle it to deal chip damage and draw cards, and in Legacy you can use Brainstorm to put your high cost spells on top of your library to deal massive damage to your opponent. Duelist of the Mind. It's not as good as Ledger Shredder, unfortunately. And it all comes down to the +1/+1 counters part. The +1/+1 counters make it so that it won't die to as many things, but because it has a permanent toughness of 3, it will always be susceptible to stuff like Lightning Bolt or Fiery Impulse in Pioneer, but triggering off every second spell is much better than just 1 crime per turn, but I could see this in some sort of control variant.
Hey now, hold your horses. Let's say you have at least 2 on the battlefield and they trigger. You're looking at 2 3/3s with flying and vigilance on your turn. Considering how often Murktide commits acts of questionable legality, it's not a stretch to think that you can do some damage. It's not the most powerful thing in the world, but it is something. And if you're looking for power, play him in a ring deck, why not?
Oh, this is gonna be a long one. Duelist of the Mind is the card I've been brewing recently. I'm not entirely sure why. First, I tried in my Pioneer Blue-White control deck because of all the card draw and acts of questionable legality you commit, but that obviously didn't work because control decks don't need efficient creatures to attack and block. What they need is to counter spells, destroy cards, and win the game after going to turns. Next, I tried Duelist in Modern Murktide in place of some Shredders, and I kinda like it here. The blocking is relevant in Modern, and a third of the deck triggers the loot. I'd still say Shredder is slightly better in most cases, but that requires more testing. Though I'm not too confident it'll catch on, considering most lists don't even run Shredder anymore. Magda the Horde Master is going to be really good in Rakdos Sacrifice and Pioneer, especially alongside Generous Plunderer. Because at the beginning of your upkeep, its target opponent gets a tapped treasure token, that's a crime, which will trigger Magda, which will get you another treasure token, so that means when you swing in, you deal 2 damage per Generous Plunderer, or whenever those treasures are sacrificed, your Mayhem Devil is going to ping your opponent, which is another crime, which means you can do crimes each turn, so you essentially sacrifice a treasure to commit a crime to get a treasure back, and then eventually you will have enough for your Scorpion Dragon with haste.
Magda could also be played in Modern alongside Ragavan and the countless ways to commit acts of questionable legality on your opponent's turn. I don't know if I want to run the Plunderer though. Even if they come in tapped, you don't want to be giving your opponents treasures.
I found barely any decks that play Magda, and that's a shame, because she offers a fun deck style. You could play Bauble, Relic, Ragavan, Fable the Mirror Breaker, Bull, Thoughtseize, Bowmasters, maybe Grief, and I guess Not Dead After All. And you can put Croaks in there just in case, but you're gonna have to cut a few cards. Maybe Magda... Oh, I get it now. Spinewood's Armadillo I could see as a replacement for Herd Migration in the Quintorius combo decks, but I'm not completely sold on it just yet. Sure, it's essentially the same effect, but I kind of would rather have 5 3/3s than just 1 7/7. Sure, it has Reach and War 3, but I'm just not completely sold on it because you already have Beanstalk Giant. Maybe as a replacement for Beanstalk Giant, but even then, Beanstalk Giant is, You know, you cast the Adventure, then you get it later. I guess it just really depends on how much you value the ward and the reach. The Armadillo has pretty much replaced Herd Migration and Pioneer Quintorius decks, primarily because you can bring them back out with Virtue of Persistence. I've also found a few Living End decks that are using them, which isn't terribly surprising. And speaking of Armadillos, Armored Armadillo. Kellen says that they want to ride it. This isn't a mount. That is a flavor fail, and it is why this set is utter garbage.
Legion Extruder is going to be great in Artifact and Sacrifice decks in Pioneer. Anything from food to clues to Thopters to equipment can be sacrificed to make a 3/3 golem, and dealing damage on impact is very relevant.
Yep, Pioneer Artifact decks definitely play this card. But also, I found a Legacy deck that uses it alongside Band Goblin. Good. Aven Interrupter is a great counterspell staple to a creature, and it's also a great deterrent for cards that are being played from exile, say the Quintorius combo. Aven is in the sideboard of Pioneer decks looking to counter the Quint combo while getting around Thought Distortion. They also see play in the creature-focused Amalia combo decks as both interaction and protection. And speaking of the Quintorius combo, High Noon puts a stop to that, as well as Arclight Phoenix. Speaking of Arclight Phoenix, Magebane Lizard puts a stop to the Arclight Phoenix. Well, not necessarily a stop to it, but it just makes it really, really hurt. Also, the fact that it's a 1/4 has it get around stuff like Fiery Impulse, so you have to use a Lightning Axe to get rid of it. Yeah, these two definitely see play in Pioneer. Phoenix is gonna Phoenix. Speaking of Arclight Phoenix, Highway Robbery. I like this card. It could easily see play in Pauper or Arclight Phoenix and Pioneer, but I want to point out an interesting design part of it. Most of the time, spells like this, you have to discard or sacrifice or whatever as a part of the casting cost, but here, it's a part of the resolution because this set has so many counter spells and interactions that it's kind of necessary to put it into the resolution instead of the casting cost. Otherwise, you'd just be discarding a card or sacrificing a land, and then it gets countered by one of the many counter spells in the set. I like that attention to just the draft format. You know, it's just nice to see. I found Highway Robbery in both Pauper Burn and Pioneer Phoenix. I've even seen some modern brews, but I've learned not to get my hopes up. But just in case, can we please get Buried Alive in MH3? I'd be so happy.
Hi, it's Future Insignios, and Buried Alive was just spoiled. I'm very happy.
3 Steps Ahead will definitely see play in tempo decks, but no control decks as they won't really have a creature to copy. But in tempo decks, this is a very nice counter spell, or draw spell, or clone spell. And most importantly, whenever you cast it, you could say, I'm 3 steps ahead.
Well, we got this one completely wrong. 3 Steps Ahead is in control decks almost exclusively, as a smaller Cryptic Command kind of card. On first glance, Pillage the Bog looks like a really good card. On turn 2, you dig 4 cards deep. On turn 4, you dig 8 cards deep, assuming you've been hitting your land drops. It's pretty good, and you can plot it on layaway. The thing is, though, no matter how many cards you look at, you're only getting 1 card into your hand. And at the end of the day, that's not a lot.
I'm not so sure about that. Yes, there are many better effects in blue, but this isn't a blue card. Black and green decks are often very combo focused, and this will allow them to find your pieces.
Don't listen to Past Me, he's an idiot. Combo decks of all shapes and sizes love this card so much. Nib to Light and Creativity especially. Grand Abolisher and Torpor Orb are making their appearance into Pioneer. Good! Honestly good. They're both more so sideboard cards if anything, but I like them. They're just really good. Yeah, these cards are great.
Lava Spur Brutes can be tutored with Saga, so any deck that runs them can make use of this Ward 1 Haste and +1/0. Decks like Hammer Time, Hardened Scales, Jund, and Affinity.
Yep, Urza's Saga is certainly one of the cards of all time. Now, Lost GT might seem underwhelming on first glance, because it's nowhere near as powerful as the original 2-mana Planeswalker, Umezawa's GT. But hear me out. You can grab it off of Urza's Saga, that's pretty good, and there is a deck in Modern called Dice Factory Tron. The deck centers around charge counters and +1/+1 counters, which is where the Dice Factory name comes from, because you have so many dice on all of your cards. Thing is, Lost GT uses charge counters and untaps lands. The thing about Tron is that you have the Tron lands that produce a lot of mana, so you could very easily use this for shenanigans in Dice Factory Tron. Now, Dice Factory Tron isn't and never really has been meta, but getting a new card for the deck is always neat, and that's what I always like to see. Fringe decks getting new cards that breathe new life into them. Not every set needs to add a new card to an already powerful archetype. Looking at you, Leyline of the Guild Pact. We got this one right on the money. Even the part about Dice Factory Tron not getting all that much better. The GTA is also in some hardened scales list for both counters and untapping Urza Saga so that you can make more constructs. Now, I have an Asmerano Market Dice in a Kuldakar deck in Modern, and I like Fomori Vault. No more than a 1-of in the deck, and honestly, I'm only going to be trying it out if it actually works, because the deck is pretty color intensive as it is. I just like it. I just really like it. Vault really wasn't the best fit for my Asmerano Markadicing Kuldakar deck, but it's certainly making waves in Affinity, Thopter Sword, Hammer Time, and especially Vintage. But my Asmerano Markadicing Kuldakar food deck means jack shit when put up against Pest Control. Pest Control! Who asked for this?
Oh no, here we go again.
Seriously, like, most decks hinge on their 1-drops. And sure, like, the vast majority of decks aren't all 1-drops. But, like, a 2-mana board wipe that hits... this card is perfectly fine, honestly. Like, a bit much, but it's reasonable. He just really likes his food decks. So while he rambles, let's talk about the cards we missed the first time around. Smuggler's Surprise has found itself in many decks, but it hasn't really settled in just yet, so it's something to keep an eye on. But to name two, Amulet Titan and Legacy Eldrazi. Lively Dirge has been in a few Yogg decks since it can both revive and tutor multiple combo pieces at once. Hostile Investigator is pretty good in those Wastenot decks I mentioned earlier. Aegis was assimilated into Stoneforge decks as an albeit telegraphed piece of removal. Free Shard to Look At has found a home in both the Rock as well as some Scapeshift decks that have been kind of interesting. And wait, is that Magda? Oh my god, that's so cool. This is the kind of stuff I want to see. Outlaw Medic has made its way into the Pauper Call Gates deck, and the Pink Deserts have made it into Burn. And speaking of the deserts, shout out to the Calibrated Blast players in Modern for running the deserts to get in those last few life points. And finally, look, if I didn't do that, it would be considered an act of questionable legality. Anyway, if you told me that the cat lady who summons meteors would see consistent play in Modern Amulet Titan decks, I would not only call you a liar, but I would also accuse you of saying that purely because you thought she's a bit of a baddie. But no, she's actually there and for a good reason. Primarily in the sideboard, you can use her to take out Magus of the Moon, and you can use the Meteorites to pay for Pact even when Blood Moon is out. And that's it. I'll see you in a few days to talk about the MH3 spoilers. Why does it have cycling? Like, who made this card? Who?
3-turn games, tokens to sack when they call his name. It all fades to black. Yeah, the Elks could swing, band and everything. Hey, we don't talk about Oko, no. We don't talk about Oko.
Never should have brought up Oko. Alright, new Oko. New Oko is fine. It doesn't do as much as old Oko, who is on the bonus sheet. So if you open this in pre-release, have fun.